Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are here to talk to you about our 2023 budget for our plan to house 1,000 Denverites. The news we're excited to share is that we know this strategy works, we know how to pay for it, and we know how to do it within our existing resources. And so I think it's important for us to share that we both have a path to provide the services we need. We know we can do that without cutting back on any other critical key city services, and that we think these resources give us the path to get to the 1,000 units we need to get people out of unsheltered homelessness into housing with the wraparound services they need to be successful. So we want to walk you through the conversation we had with City Council this morning about both the costs that we're looking at and the sources of how those costs are paid for. What you'll see today, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, you may remember we've talked about 4 kind of key strategies to this effort, and that's what you'll see the budget items aligned to. These include 3 ways we're focusing on getting people out of unsheltered homelessness and into housing. That's first through leased units that we can bring on board around the city. That's units we can get from landlords who are willing to contract with partners so we can get people off the streets and directly into housing. Second one are obviously focused on hotel conversions, which you've seen some of our releases already on hotel acquisitions that also come with wraparound on-site services, including mental health and addiction and workforce training. The third are obviously the micro-communities where we're looking at sites around the city that can be used to put tiny homes or pallet shelters on that we can also include access to bathrooms, kitchens, showers, wraparound services. And the long-term goal that being when we can move people out of homelessness and into housing, we can then close these encampments and keep those encampments closed permanently and keep those neighborhoods free from future camping, which allow us to really activate those city streets and parks and public spaces for everybody to use. So those are the priority areas. I want to connect you between these priority areas and the budgets aligned to those areas. We can go ahead to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I have one minor celebration slide first. These are some key accomplishments you may want to know about. Obviously, we have already executed a master purchase order for 200 pallet homes, which are the first part of our focus on the micro-communities. We have already acquired 2 hotels against that priority list. We have put out an RFP for manufactured sleeping units, which is what we are often called tiny homes. So pallet shelters in purchase, hotels have purchased, tiny homes are coming. We've released the set of sites for feedback. We've had now, I think, 29 town halls already with more than 4,000 Denverites who've showed up to join these conversations. We've also started some basic service deployment at some of these encampments, including both trash collection and restrooms. And we are preparing this week to launch our first stage of an encampment resolution model, which will be our first process to begin to connect people to housing, close those encampments, house people, and keep those encampments closed. So that's a little bit about key progress to date. Here's the data you most want to know. So when we look at these buckets of costs and how they break down, here's been our areas of focus. Hotel conversions themselves, this total cost is about $48 million. So that's for 2023, the cost to be able to serve this project is around $48 million. How those break down are on hotel conversions, we have $18.9 million, which was for the purchase and operations of the former Best Western. We have other leases and operations at additional hotels, around $5.5 million. For the micro communities, this $19 million includes both acquiring pallet shelters, acquiring tiny homes, the site preparation, any retrofitting, utilities, operations, support services, all included there. And then the leased units are focused on about $4 million there for moving people into rapid rehousing contracts, which is helping pay the leases in those units. And then encampment response directly are focused on the outreach transportation services that go to that kind of structured outreach. I'll remind you the overall host, well, actually you can go to the next slide. These are where those dollars come from. Our overall host budget for the year, as a set of context, is about $250 million. And so keep in mind the city currently has about $250 million allocated in this year's budget that was meant to focus on housing and on homelessness. And so what you'll see is the great bulk of these dollars come from our existing host budget. $37 million comes from the host budget that we have laid out. These name out the specific sources for those. Some of them were obviously ARPA funding. Some of them are existing homeless resolution fund dollars. Some of them are places we've repurposed. I'll give you one example. Last year we were prepared to use recreation centers as places for overnight shelter in cold weather because we didn't have places for people to go. By being able to directly focus on getting people off of the streets and into housing, we changed the need to actually outfit temporary sites like recreation centers, and instead in places that are much more stable, secure, long-term, like the micro-communities, like the hotel conversions, like the leased units. There were also some places where we had some additional funds available, like the remaining funds after our Best Western purchase. We had additional funds, some savings we had on things like the 48th Avenue shelter improvements, and or there were some vacancy savings here on the host overall general fund budget. So that's a little bit about where dollars come from that were within host. The other sources of dollars you'll see here are those that we used that include three. One is COVID response funding from the general funds. These were dollars we had in COVID for COVID response. They were specifically targeting at non-congregate shelter for COVID patients. That was literally hotels often or hotel conversions for COVID patients. Great aligned use of those dollars to move them from that into now focus on getting unhoused people into shelter. Same, there was just interest earnings on the ARPA funds, and there were some additional capital improvement funding dollars that we had from some real estate acquisitions that saved us dollars. So what you'll see here is the plan is fully paid for. We have a path to success on that plan, and we can deliver success on that plan without cutting critical city services that we want to make sure to deliver throughout the course of helping unhoused neighbors and still making sure we're serving all the rest of the city well. So I think that's the end of my dance card. Right? Is there anything else I have on the next slide? Or is that the end? Great. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of where we are, why we're excited to roll that out today, and also helps us give concrete answers to people around the city on how much it costs and where the dollars come from. So with that, I will stop and happy to take questions people may have on any of the information I laid out here. Yes, sir.
Hey, question about the affordable housing of the $254 million allocated for this year's budget. How much of that would be for affordable housing, and how does the city plan on attacking that?
Are you talking about the 2023 budget or the 2024 budget?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the easiest way to answer that is going to be in 2 days, we're going to be back to talk to you about our comprehensive 2024 budget, which lays out the distribution of all of those dollars in 2024 against the whole priority of housing needs that run from unsheltered homelessness up to micro-communities and hotels, up to eviction protection and rental assistance on through affordable housing for working families. So that will be our first budget where we'll lay that out for 2024. I think I'll just say, looking back on the last administration's budget for this year, I do think it was dedicated to that continuum of needs also, on homelessness, on affordable and attainable housing, on home ownership, and on rental assistance. So I think the first department is meant to focus on that entire continuum, as it does, and our 2024 budget will lay that out. But we are just focusing today on the 2023 budget for this specific initiative on housing 1,000 individuals. There's obviously a lot of great work continuing to go on in the host department and other parts of the housing need. Yes, sir.
The salary for your homeless initiative team included in the budget?
No, so the salaries for our homeless initiative team is under our current mayor's office budget for appointees. So those folks were appointees underneath the mayor's office. The mayor's office has allocated about 64 appointees across all departments and agencies. They are in that. Yes.
To set the talk starting point, how confident are you that you will be able to have all 1,000 people in some kind of housing by the end of the year?
We are confident that we're going to be able to deliver on that. We have acquired, we have a good line of sight to the units we need to be able to get people moved. Obviously, lots can happen, but we believe we will have the units available to get 1,000 people housed. The key part now comes in our outreach to all those folks that are unhoused, connecting them to services, identifying what their individual housing needs are as we start the encampment resolution process, going encampment by encampment, talking to unhoused neighbors and figuring out what their specific needs are. Some have partners they want to live with. Some have pets they want to live with. Some want to live in a community with other veterans or with other members who share LGBTQ identities. There are plenty of opportunities we have to help connect individuals with services. So what we'll start doing now is that to match the units we have with the needs that individuals have.
You're great with 10%. We've heard from people who live near these potential sites their concerns about potential violence, drug use. What do you say to them? Because these are very real concerns that a lot of people have expressed to us.
Yeah, we've had very good conversations with people from around the city around this, and what I say is this is the reason why we're pursuing this strategy. And this is the reason why we know this strategy works, which is right now, if you look at the data just from 2023 alone, if we look at 911 calls, for instance, to encampments, that number is over 6,000 911 calls the city has got to encampments at this stage. If you look at sheltered, congregate shelters right now, those are over 2,000 calls we've gotten to those settings where there's still large numbers of people in small amounts of space. If you look at the safety risks at the places that are micro-communities like the ones we're describing, in the last calendar year, all of 2022 combined, we had a micro-community that had a total of 3 service calls to 911. Another micro-community had 14 in all of 2022. So you're talking about sites that are literally 1/1000th of the safety risk to the community of what the current situation is. The most dangerous thing for communities would be for us to continue to do what we've done in the past. That is actually the single most dangerous strategy. And keep folks living in environments that are unsupervised, unstructured, unsafe. We know when we get people out of these settings into settings that do have wraparound services, that do have staff around the clock, that do have interventions, do have requirements for identity to get in. They're not walk-up facilities. These are the safest, most stable structures, which is why what you'll hear also from communities who opposed these sites before they came is once they've arrived, those communities have been really quite satisfied with how safe and stable those sites have been. I always use the 47 Monroe as a good example of that. But we'll hear stories from people who fought the arrival of a safe outdoor space or a tiny home village, and once it arrived, and years later they decided to move that site on, those same neighbors fought in leaving because they actually found it to be a really great addition to the neighborhood. So we understand the concerns. We understand the fear. We think this structure is proven to be safer for unhoused residents and safer for neighbors.
You mentioned that no other city services would be impacted. That seems pretty incredible. How do you find this money without having to cut services anywhere else in neighborhoods across the city?
Yeah. So what I said is that you go back to that slide. What we showed you is for the 2023 budget, where we brought these dollars from are places where there are either aligned priorities, like work that a Department on Housing and Homelessness was already doing. That department is designed to do this work. And also in places where we have savings or opportunities to reallocate dollars that were not dedicated to other high-need critical city services. Of course, they're all city dollars, and there are different ways we can use them, but we think these are the highest and best priority, and it's not a situation where we're saying we're cutting police officers to be able to fund this, or we are shutting down rec centers. We made sure to protect all of the other critical public services.
Mayor Tony Kowaleski with Denver South.
I know.
Well, many have applauded you taking on a very aggressive attack on this issue that is near and dear to many people in Denver. Others have reached out to our team and questioned a number you threw out here the day after you were sworn in. And I believe you said that 90% of the homeless in Denver really want housing. Others, boots on the ground, said that number is really aggressive and it may not even be 50% because of a variety of reasons. Now that you've had a arms around it, are you still confident that the 90% number is accurate? And if not, what is it?
Yeah, that 90% number that we have in the survey of folks who were unhoused conducted here in Denver, I will say it's consistent with the range of data we've seen from other cities that have tried to do this, which is we know there is a real difference between people taking access to congregate shelter, saying, do you want to go to a shelter tonight where you're going to be in group living, versus would you take an individualized unit where you have a lock and a key to store your own stuff and you're protected and safe. Our response to these types of units is where you get such dramatically higher uptake and willingness to do it. And my anecdotal evidence from all the conversations I've had with folks that are unhoused over the last 2 months reinforces that conviction. When I go to talk to people, they'll say, can you help me get access to a job? Can you help me find a unit to live in? And so we're very optimistic about that. I'll still say, even given whatever, even if that number is 25% who don't accept services, we know, of the 1,000 people we're trying to get housed, there are more than at least the 1,500 people that are unhoused today. So we're not going to get to all of them in this stretch. But we think there's going to be more than enough demand from individuals to move into those sites. And I shared with Tony some of the conversations we've had before. There's strong evidence here in the city around that demand, even some of the previous efforts where there were hotel conversions or wraparound services. And we had 850 plus individuals who signed up and were on a wait list to get access to those units. So we don't think we're going to have a challenge with demand. It's just a matter of getting the units up and ready and getting folks linked to the right housing for them.
Mayor, can you talk about how you plan to permanently close encampments on sidewalks once this is rolling?
Yes, I mean, I think Our goal here is that we know the reason the current strategy hasn't worked is it's very hard to move people off of one city block if we have no place else for them to go but the next city block. So I've visited even some of the encampments we've had to clean up. I've visited individuals there before we did cleanups. I visited encampments 2 weeks later and met those same individuals in the next encampment 4 blocks down. And now we have the same challenge in those encampments. And so we know that's what's happening right now is we're shuffling people without long-term resolution. When we can move them to housing, we can move them to housing in real numbers. We can open 200 units on a day, which allow us to open or to close 6 or 8 blocks of encampments. That allows us to really move entire encampments, close entire encampments, and then set up with neighborhood groups and public safety and business organizations to help activate those city streets and keep them free from future encampments. I think one great success story on that front has been Civic Center Park. Civic Center Park hit a place where it was in real crisis, had to shut it down for a period of time. The city has now reopened it, has activated and enforced that park, and there's not camping anymore in that park. And so we think there's a path for us to do that across the city. We're working closely with a coalition of members within the city and outside of city government on that joint response. What do we do how do we activate arts and venues and public infrastructure and public safety and nonprofit partners and business districts so that those neighborhoods are active and vibrant and they're kept clean of future camping.
If I may, I heard Evan Dryer's back. I heard he was at the sweep at Crossroads last week. Is he on for a longer term stint to help you with this?
Evan's been wonderful to stay on and help us in this transition at this stage, and has been a great help right now, and so we're glad to have him on. And he's been helping in the EOC as well as with our outreach going forward, and we're grateful for his help. Yes, sir.
Para la audiovisión en español, ¿podrían hacer un breve resumen de cuánto es la inversión y cuántas personas se van a beneficiar del programa, del plan?
¿Cuántas personas que vamos a servir? La propuesta es que vamos a servir a 1,000 de personas que en este momento ya están viviendo en el CAE y queremos obtener casas y hoteles que podemos convertir para usar por casas accesibles por esas personas y queremos hacer esos 1,000 de personas antes del fin de ese año. Gracias.
Could you explain the difference between the roughly 52 million listed in that previous slide and the 48.6 million that you gave?
I was waiting for the advanced math student. Well done. So thank you. So you're correct. What this is just a little bit of protection for us in case there are any overruns in costs. And so we have about a 3 million or so additional padding here and sources of revenue we have that we could use for these priorities. What we find is you get to a site and you find that the clearance of that site is tougher than you thought, or the utility hookups are more complicated than you thought, or the layout of units mean you require to do them differently. And so this is just a little bit of flexibility it provides us, given that we still have more sites we're working on developing and other potential partners to bring on, and so that gives us just a little bit of flexibility.
We have time for one more question.
We reached the end of the internet. There are no more questions.
Well, I got a question. Would the city ever consider in the future using eminent domain to acquire future micro-communities?
We have not seen a need to do that at this stage. We've actually seen quite the opposite. We've seen a wonderful, willing partnership from private landowners who, I think every one of these communities, we've had someone come up and say, hey, I have a site I want you to try to use. And to their credit, we've tried a bunch of those. Some of them we get obstacles, but people have been very forthcoming on being a part of the solution. And I think they see this the same way we do, which is they understand that the current situation is a crisis and that every community is affected right now by the impact of unhoused neighbors. Those people that are unhoused are certainly impacted, and the neighborhoods are. And they realize that they would rather put their site to a productive use to help address this problem than continue to fight the problem as it exists. We have many landowners who are saying, right now, I'm spending more money and time and effort to try to keep individuals off of this site that have no structure, no supervision, no support. I'd much rather give you the site and have you provide real high-quality housing, support services, and structure, and have them back on their feet, and have this land being falling into kind of disuse as it is right now. So we've had very positive feedback. We don't anticipate needing to use that anytime soon.
And Mayor, did you say how long you expect them to stay open once they get running?
Micro-communities?
Yes.
I think the long-term zoning capacity is up to 4 years, but I think we've looked at potentially a 2 to 4 year timeline. As people know, this goes to our longer need around affordable housing. What we know is a lot of the reasons why folks are stuck is it's very hard for you to get a unit you can afford to rent in the city if you are a first-year school teacher, not to mention if you're unhoused. Right now, in Fort Reminder, 40% of the people who are unhoused in the city right now are working. They have jobs. They just can't make enough money to pay a first and last month's rent. And so what we're really working on is getting folks into these transitional supportive housing units, so we can then work on expanding the number of affordable units that are available across the city. If we have a bigger supply of those units, we can move them all faster. So the better we can do at building long-term affordability, the faster we can move folks out of transitional housing into permanent housing.
And one last question, I promise. As you get these 1,000 off the street and into housing, what's to say more people will not come and experience homelessness? Is there a plan in place to deal with future people coming into the city as you get these folks into permanent places?
Yeah, we do know the number of people entering homelessness is increasing. That's increasing because the cost of living is going up significantly, and so we do know that there is a pipeline of folks that are going to continue to enter homelessness if we don't stop that upstream. And that's why one of the things we'll focus on in our 2024 budget is what we're doing to prevent people from entering homelessness, including things like rental assistance, eviction protection, and more rapid rehousing for people to get into units right away. So we have to focus on all parts of the pipeline. Preventing people who are in units now from getting evicted or losing their units and getting homeless, getting folks that are unsheltered into transitional housing, getting folks that are in transitional housing into permanent rental units, getting people that are in rental units into home ownership. Right? That's the ladder we want everyone to climb to end up in home ownership. And so we'll focus on discrete investments at each stage of this pipeline to make sure we're both getting people out of homelessness and also preventing more people from entering it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful Tuesday. We'll see you again in 48 hours to do the part 2 version of this for 2024.